In Arcane's Prey reboot, there's a subtle design decision that can be found in almost every aspect of the game's design. It's one of those things I believe the game uses to great effect in order to maintain its sense of immersion, but it's also something that's very easy to miss and often goes underappreciated. It's a thing I'm referring to as a limited use of what I'm calling context switching. I'm not sure if that's the technical term or the appropriate name in the game design world, but I think it fits what I'm talking about, and that's what I'm going to be discussing. Early on in the game, you wake up in your bed and you're allowed to walk around your bedroom. One of the things you can interact with is your computer. Now, interacting with computer terminals isn't anything new, but in Prey, it's not interacting with the terminal that's interesting, but rather how you interact with the terminal that I found super interesting. In other games, you would walk up to the terminal and then you would press an interact button. Generally, you would say press this to use the computer, which would then zoom you into the computer screen where the context has now switched from you controlling your character to you using the terminal. However, in Prey, that doesn't happen. Prey does it in a much more elegant and seamless implementation. In Prey, you just use your camera to select the buttons on the screen as if you were using a touchscreen in real life. All this time, you maintain control of your character and your range of movement goes unhindered and your control remains unchanged. This may seem overblown or might just seem like I'm making something out of nothing, but for anyone who has played the game, I ask how often can you reflect the game ever changing the context, where it switched the controls or it entered a different state that involved a change in how you actually interact with the game. Outside of the menus, door locks, and hacking, I can't really recollect any substantial moments of context switching, of course negating the obvious times where it would have to be required, like when you literally become another object, which of course that would require context switch. But I guess it's worth mentioning that I haven't finished the game yet, so there might be moments ahead I'm not aware of. I got as far as 12 hours into my first playthrough before the game bugged out so bad that all the items in the game just fell through the floor, and then it basically became unplayable. But that's a discussion for another day and might include other more recent games. Anyways, let's get back to context switches, or the lack thereof. This design aspect is something I see Arcane make a continuous effort to follow in all of their games. Whether I'm walking down a block or rewiring a lookout tower or crawling under a table or any other situation, the game keeps a consistent context, where its controls stay consistent, and so does the perspective at which you approach the world. Of course, it's impossible to make a game as complex as an immersive sim without context switches, especially with the limited buttons you would find on a console controller, but the number of switches can be substantially reduced by designing mechanics with that principle in mind. Let me give you an example of how two developers can tackle the same goal but in two different ways, and the outcome is one requires a context switch while the other one avoids ever having to use one. I will compare Arcane's approach to using cover in their games, and I'll compare that to another very skilled immersive sim developer, Eidos Montreal, the developers of the modern Deus Ex games. In Deus Ex, you press a button to attach yourself to cover. At this point, your perspective shifts from first person to a third person camera, and your axis of movement is reduced from the free three-dimensional movement that you would have normally to now you only have one-dimensional movement, left or right along this wall. And your ability to shoot freely is replaced with the need to now pop out of cover before you can take aim. In effect, there's a free movement context and then there's an in-cover context. In comparison, Arcane's games tend to let you use a lean interaction over an explicit cover system. This allows their games to maintain a consistent level of interaction that keeps your perspective, controls, and access of movement unchanged. When a player is hiding behind cover, they are still able to do everything else they would have been able to do had they been just standing around. This may seem like a small detail, but to me it goes a long way at maintaining immersion and it improves game feel. It makes the boundaries of the gaminess of this game disappear. Instead, interactions feel like you're inhabiting the body of this character and you are playing or interacting in this virtual space the same way you would in the real world. Limiting context switching is a principle found in other developers' games as well. In fact, one of the greatest examples of this principle of design can be found in Half-Life 2. This design principle is at the core of many of Valve's classic first-person games. This focus towards building immersion through maintaining a consistent level of control and perspective. And this isn't only limited to first-person shooter games or highly physics-based games either. Another great example of this in practice can be found in From Software's Soulsborne games. In these games, there's no pausing when you're menuing, which is a result of their online nature, but the implementation isn't just as simple as that. As many Souls players know, and as many speedrunners have used to their benefit, in a Souls game, when you enter a menu, you retain control over the player's movement and as well as the camera. The game doesn't remove your ability to control your character, and this opens up new gameplay opportunities, but more importantly, it provides a level of consistency in its controls that I appreciate a ton. Another interesting place in the Souls series that this adherence to retaining control is present is when you enter a dialogue conversation. And this is something becoming more present in other RPGs like Cyberpunk or Fallout 4, where you enter a conversation just by walking up to a character and interacting with them. And this doesn't change the context to dialogue mode, where you would now sit and listen to a conversation and then would have to pick the leave conversation option to reestablish the normal exploration game interactions context. Instead, you walk up to the characters that you want to talk to, you stay in control during the conversation, and you leave the conversation just by walking away. It's a much more natural and elegant implementation. It makes interacting with NPCs way more like a real-world encounter, again, boosting the immersive quality of the game. Also, if an NPC is getting on your bad side, you could always hit that attack button, because even during conversations, the weapon's always at the ready. Oh damn, you got a lot of HP. Haha, bleeding. I love it. You know what? Just eat some fire, dude. Well, since I already killed that guy... Now, this doesn't mean that this automatically makes the encounters better than they would have been without this attention to removing context switches. I think every person who has played Fallout 4 can attest to how weak its dialogue system is. Like any other design choice, reducing context switches must be implemented carefully and with proper consideration. I hope this also highlighted that considerations for reducing context switching can come in many forms and in different places across games. Also, I want to make it clear that I understand why some developers may add context switches to make interacting with objects in an environment easier to manage for the player. Also, style is unique to every developer, and sometimes effective context switch usage can help accentuate a consistency in a developer's design. I just prefer fewer context switches whenever it's possible. Well, that's all I wanted to talk about in this video. An active focus by developers in keeping a consistency of control and perspective across various interactions in a game. I just hope you learned something or at least found this discussion interesting. And I'd like to know your thoughts on it if you feel the same or different. Remember to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.